Snow White is currently the most talked about movie of 2025, and not for good reasons. How did this mess even start? Though Disney has successfully made live-action versions of their animated stories since the 1990s, the contemporary live-action trend started with Alice in Wonderland in 2010, which made over $1 billion in the box office. Cinderella in 2015 launched the model of making live-action versions of their classic fairy tales, particularly with characters that are a part of the Disney princess lineup. Similar remakes such as Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin also made over $1 billion. It seems that Disney has cultivated a very lucrative, though low-effort, business model. While some viewers have criticized these films for not having the heart the originals had, the tides really began turning with Mulan in 2020, which added unnecessary plot points and removed the beloved songs for no good reason. And soon after, there was a slew of underwhelming remakes coming one after the other. But of all the live-action remakes, it's safe to say that Snow White has received the most criticism. For 3 years, there's been non-stop coverage about this film, the vast majority of which are negative. And now that it's released, the outrage continues on. But is Snow White really as bad as they say? To get better context for this film, I'm going to start off by discussing the original story of Snow White and some of its notable adaptations. But if you'd just like to see the movie review, you can skip to this part of the video. Just be aware, there are spoilers ahead. Snow White is a fairy tale written by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. Like many fairy tales, Snow White was written as a cautionary tale, describing the dangers of vanity and jealousy and the triumph of good over evil. This fantastical story of a princess and a poison apple would catch the eye of Walt Disney. Snow White and the Seven Dwarves was the first full-length animated film ever made, and was the highest-grossing movie for the time. Though it faced a troubled production, Snow White was renowned as a visual feast. Animation never looked smoother and lifelike. Some of the stylistic inspirations included 1936's Romeo and Juliet, where the play also inspired the balcony scene, as well as German expressionist films. But this story is foremost about not giving up on hope during a time of hardship, and that inevitably, good will win over evil, matching the cultural ethos of Great Depression America. Snow White established various tropes that would become staples in other Disney animated films, including princesses who long for better lives, evil step-parents, animal sidekicks, and happily ever afters. The next large-scale movie production of Snow White happened twice in 2012. Mirror Mirror was a light-hearted fantasy comedy, where this time, the dwarves are bandits, and Snow teams up with them and becomes a skilled sword fighter who fights with the prince and a dragon sent by the queen. She even saves the prince from the spell. This movie is also a favorite amongst costume design fans. Snow White and the Huntsman was a dark fantasy action-adventure film, with Snow in armor taking care of the queen herself. Instead of a prince, she falls in love with the huntsman, who is given a more romantic twist. Both of these films were relatively successful in the box office, proving that there is a market for updated Snow White renditions. The plan for Disney to make a live-action version of Snow White began in 2016. Mark Webb, who previously directed 500 Days of Summer and The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, was confirmed to direct this movie. More notably, it was announced in 2021 that Rachel Zegler, who at the time was most noted for portraying Maria in West Side Story, is going to be the new Snow White, just beating out actress Renata Vaca, who I'd say got lucky here. Around the same time, actor Peter Dinklage, who has a form of dwarfism, criticized the story of Snow White for being backwards, especially with its representation of dwarf characters. Though his criticism has been criticized, Disney then made a public statement of, to avoid reinforcing stereotypes from the original animated film, we are taking a different direction with these 7 characters and have been consulting with members of the dwarfism community. PR-wise, this movie is already not at a good start. In the same year, Rachel Zegler gave an interview at D23 Expo, and her public image would never be the same again. She mentioned that she was excited to portray Snow White, and then stated that the new Snow White isn't going to focus on a love story, called the prince in the Disney film A Stalker, and said that, for all we know, the scenes with the new love interest could be cut out. To me, it more sounds like the latter 2 statements were jokes that fell flat. But either way, a lot of people were not happy. And from then on today, Snow White, or specifically Rachel Zegler, became the new obsession for outrage content farms. The official trailer was released in December 2024, and is currently the most disliked movie trailer on YouTube, with a crazy ratio of 65,000 likes and over 1 million dislikes. And on top of that, a big-scale premiere was cancelled. It really seemed that Disney was trying not to bring too much attention to themselves and just wanted the Snow White era to be done with. An LA premiere took place just recently, but without any red carpet press, allegedly due to Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot's differing political opinions. But this isn't a political event, this is about Snow White, but anyways. Even at the Oscars, Zegler and Gal Gadot, who portrays the evil queen, reportedly didn't like being around each other. But the glass is still half full, or 1/10 full, I guess. On my social media feed, I did see some people that were excited about the new Snow White. I can't lie when I say that I was pretty excited to see what all the fuss really was about. Would the new Snow White be as sweet as apple pie, or is it just rotten to the core? I'm having fun. We're gonna look into Disney's Snow White. So now, let's get started. Snow White begins with a narration describing a peaceful kingdom, ruled by a good king and queen. During a blizzard, a princess was born, and she was given the name Snow White. During her upbringing, everyone in the kingdom is happy. This is demonstrated in the first musical number, Where the Good Things Grow. The music in this film was written by songwriting duo Pascal and Paul, who also composed the music for La La Land, The Greatest Showman, Aladdin, Dear Evan Hansen, and Spirited. They're kind of the go-to writers for musical films at the moment, but their songs get the occasional criticism for being generic. I guess having a song called Where the Good Things Grow to describe a successful and happy kingdom isn't especially creative. The lyrics are kind of meh, but I like the melody. The song gets interrupted for more narration, and just 3 minutes in, it feels that everything is going on way too fast. This is only the beginning for this movie's pacing issues and the awkward presentation of its musical numbers. But Snow's father encourages her to be good, fearless, brave, and true. Though technically, fearless and brave are kind of the same things, and the rule of 3 exists for a reason, but whatever. Snow demonstrates her kindness by making apple pies for the citizens, but everything would change after Snow White's mother passes away, and her dad marries a woman who is beautiful, but evil. A terrifying, non-specific type of evil. Snow White's father has to go to war, and before he leaves, he gives her a locket that says good, fearless, brave, and true. But once he leaves, the queen turns the land gray and forces the farmers to become her soldiers. She also turns Snow into a scullery maid and even cuts her hair. I was wishfully hoping that her hair would grow out and look nice as the film progresses, especially with what we saw from the promotional material, but that doesn't happen. As years go by, there's no sign of the king, and the public forgot that there was a princess named Snow White. Snow is now grown up and still under the queen's orders. She talks to the queen about sharing. She wishes that she could bake an apple pie and everyone would eat it and be happy. But the queen says that things like pies are luxuries and rebuffs her. Shortly after this, Snow meets the prince stealing potatoes, but he isn't a prince. He's a leader of a team of bandits and gets caught by the huntsman. After this, we get the big I Want musical number, Waiting on a Wish. The song isn't half bad. It reminds me of something that could be heard in the 2000s Barbie films, as well as How Far I'll Go from Moana. Rachel Zegler comes from a theater background, and it's apparent here, though it has been noted that the belting doesn't match Snow White's gentle essence. But after the song, Snow gives the bandit guy bread and lets him free. The queen sees her singing and asks the magic mirror, who is the fairest in the land? The mirror says that Snow White is more gentle and graceful, and is therefore more fair than the queen. Because of this, the queen tells the huntsman to get rid of Snow White while she's out picking apples. We finally see her iconic Snow White dress, and wow, the coloring is off. I know that it's been said 5 million times, but the styling here could have been a lot better. Rachel has been delivering for the Snow White promos, so why aren't we getting that same energy for the film? But here is one of the more awkward scenes in the film, and trust me, that is saying a lot. The huntsman is about to get rid of Snow White, and she just stands there. She doesn't really react. I guess she's meant to be frozen in shock, but this was a weird direction. But he tells her to run into the woods. Snow White in the forest is a famously scary scene, and my interpretation was that the scary images were all from Snow's perspective. She just escaped an attack and has never been into the woods before, or at least hasn't been in there for years. So naturally, everything seems so horrific. But that emotional weight just isn't shown here. But the sun comes up and she sees a deer and other forest animals. While the CGI in this movie has been criticized a lot, I have to say that the woodland creatures are all really cute. They lead her to a desolate cottage where she sees a messy dining room and a bedroom with 7 small beds. Without saying a word, she immediately lies on the beds and naps. This is another example of this movie being weirdly rushed, but visually, at least this movie looks a lot better than how it was advertised. In the trailers, there was this weird yellow filter that we don't see as much in the film, but that only makes the colors of her dress even more garish, but still. Just a second later, the dwarves are introduced singing Hi-Ho. This is just a wasted opportunity in more ways than one. I would have much preferred if real actors were in this movie instead of CGI characters. Like, some of these live-action remakes have more animation than the original, but there's no build-up to the song. Like, if we heard some marching or some mining sounds for a bit, and then the song starts, the scene could have been a lot better. The pacing of this film is offending me. Things are happening way too fast. In the sequence, we see that the dwarves have magical abilities. Their hands glow when they touch gems, but that doesn't matter because these magical abilities are never shown or mentioned again. Incorporating their powers near the finale could have been really cool, but of course, they're not going to do anything interesting or unique with that. The dwarves come home and see someone or something inside their beds. After Dopey is made to see who's under the sheets, Snow White wakes up with a scream, but tells him to not be afraid. The other dwarves come in and immediately welcome her, except for Grumpy, of course. Snow explains her situation, and since it's raining, they let her stay for one night. Meanwhile, the queen asks the mirror who's the fairest of them all, and it's still Snow White. The queen sings a song, and this is probably the worst number of the film. While I think the cast did fine with what they were working with, Gal Gadot as the evil queen is one of the stranger performances. In some scenes, her characterization seems more petty and insecure, which could have been an interesting take on the character, but it comes across that she's holding back or is just trying to be generically evil. She tells her army to search for Snow White and take her back to the castle. The next morning, the dwarves are being mean to Dopey. He runs outside and Snow tries to make him feel better. They both know what it's like to be seen as lesser than, so they develop a friendship. It seems that Dopey doesn't speak because he's afraid to, so she teaches him how to whistle. I have a feeling he's gonna talk in the end, and this is when the whistle while you twerk sequence starts. Due to her upbringing, Snow is good at cleaning, and teaches the dwarves how to do the same. All the dwarves, except Dopey because he's more redeemable, clean their home. In the original film, the song happens so Snow White can give something in return when she sleeps in their house, believing that the dwarves are orphans. Here, she teaches the dwarves to clean so they can be less jerkish, I guess. But I was mostly distracted by Rachel's singing voice. She sounds really pretty. Snow says that when she was little, she used to sing with her father every day. She decides that she needs to find him. This plot point is kind of abrupt, but in order to protect the dwarves, it's best if she no longer stays with them. As she walks into the forest, this is the second time the bandit guy shows up, and this particular scene is the prettiest in the film, in my opinion. The guy's name is Jonathan, by the way, and he has a rebellious but good-hearted personality. If you've seen Flynn Rider and Kristoff, you pretty much know who this guy is. And then his bandit team shows up, and interestingly, there's 7 of them. I have a theory that the bandits were initially going to have a more substantial role in this film, and that the reshoots were done to add CGI dwarves at last minute, and a plotline involving them was cut out. Aside from one of them, this team never speaks, and has no discernible character traits. I wouldn't have minded if this movie was going to be Snow White and the 7 bandits. Maybe even the dwarves could have been bandits, but that already happened. This scene also has the Princess Problem song, and I like it. This scene is cute. Again, this movie does that thing of stopping a musical number midway, but it looks like Jonathan and Snow are starting to like each other. Ooh. But when the Queen's army shows up, the bandit team, along with the woodland creatures, help protect Snow White. An arrow gets John, so he's taken to Doc, where I guess he's a doctor now. Again, the part of his character was never mentioned before and never gets mentioned again. I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Why do things like this keep happening in this movie? But Jonathan's team and the dwarves celebrate together, where Snow even tries to hook up one of the bandits with the girl bandit, even though they never exchange a word of dialogue. Snow and Jonathan sing a love song where there's an out-of-place slow motion sequence. They almost kiss, but stop because everyone is staring at them, and that would be weird. As far as Disney romances go, this isn't anything out of the ordinary, albeit very generic. But Jonathan is captured by the Queen. She sings again and transforms herself into a crone. This scene has a very strange editing choice. There's cuts back and forth to the Queen making the poison apple and of her standing on a boat. But this doesn't matter too much because this means the third act has finally started. The disguised Queen offers Snow the apple and even gives her the locket from her father. She bites the apple, and as she falls into the sleeping curse, the Queen basically reveals her plan and confirms that her father is gone for good. I guess the Queen wanted to kick her while she's down, because otherwise I'm not sure why she does this other than because she's just so evil. This scene could have been more impactful if it wasn't so long and there weren't so many words exchanged. The dwarves and forest animals try to save her, but they're too late. The funeral scene happens, and at the same moment, Jonathan is locked in the dungeon with the huntsman, who survives in this version, and says that Snow never gave up on him, so he should never give up on her. They release themselves from the dungeon, very easily might I add, and hurriedly go to the cottage just to see Snow in a deep sleep. In the animated version, Snow was under the curse for months, and when she does wake up, the tone of the scene is so euphoric and powerful. But here, he finds her within a couple hours at most. It's just not the same, but we know what happens next. With True Love's kiss, Snow White is free from the spell, and then they kiss again. And this is when I noticed that Jonathan is wearing a hoodie. Snow knows that she needs to stand up to the queen in the name of her father's legacy. And then Dopey speaks. I knew it. Snow returns to the kingdom wearing a red cloak, and this is the best outfit in the movie. But I'm confused because at the beginning, the townspeople forgot about a princess named Snow White. But when they see her walking in the village, they react as if they know who she is. So they forgot about her, but at the same time, immediately know who was walking towards the castle. They all perform a reprise of Where the Good Things Grow and walk along Snow White. Maybe some French Revolution stuff is about to happen. The queen compares Snow White to a flower, but that's not a compliment because flowers wilt and are unable to rule a kingdom. When given the opportunity, Snow White doesn't get rid of the queen and reminds the soldiers of who they once were before they were ruled by a tyrant. She tells the queen to leave and never come back. She ignores her and rushes to her all-knowing mirror. Though the queen is beautiful on the outside, the mirror tells her that true beauty comes from within. The queen breaks the mirror and turns to stone. This is rather anticlimactic. But at the ending scene, everyone happily sings and dances to Where the Good Things Grow, where I'm guessing is Snow and Jonathan's wedding. A cute little hedgehog closes the storybook and waves bye to the audience. They all lived happily ever after. The end. Okay, here's where I discuss what I like and don't like about the new Snow White. The worst part about Snow White is the pacing and editing. We're not given a lot of time to settle in with the environments and emotions. It's as if this movie wants to finish as soon as possible. The pacing for some of the songs felt like it was made by someone who doesn't like musicals. Particularly for the Where the Good Things Grow and Princess Problems numbers, they weirdly stop in the middle, and then the song just ends. If this happened once and had a good reason, I wouldn't mind, but that's not the case here. And much like the songs, plot lines either suddenly vanish or come out of nowhere. Like I mentioned earlier, the dwarves having powers never gets mentioned again. Snow deciding that she needs to find her father came out of nowhere, other than mentioning him once in Waiting on a Wish. And technically, Jonathan doesn't need to be the leader of bandits. They help protect Snow White once, but otherwise they don't really do anything. Again, I'm pretty sure they were going to be more involved than what we see here. But then some last minute changes happened. The costuming was The coloring of Snow White's dress was too saturated and felt like it was just intended to sell merchandise. But I've never seen fits in a fairy tale movie that could be in a PacSun/H&M advert, so I guess they wanted to bring something new. And the queen's makeup reminds me of a 2016 makeup guru. Does anyone else see it? I'm aware I'm being picky. But for a character like the evil queen, there could have been something more interesting with her design other than a classic sultry look. Story-wise, this feels like you're watching a fan fiction of Snow White rather than a real Snow White movie, if that makes sense. Especially with Snow falling in love with a redeemable bad boy, and Dopey literally finding his voice, which was a change that some viewers felt didn't have the best implications. If he didn't want to talk, there's still other ways he could have expressed himself. Also, just having real actors playing the dwarves could have made the production a lot easier. They wouldn't need to digitally impose any characters, and maybe their performances could have made this movie less bland. I have a feeling that the writers took more inspiration from the aforementioned Mirror Mirror and Snow White and the Huntsman than it did the animated film. My spicy take is if this film was released in 2012, alongside Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror, it would have been ignored and forgotten in a similar vein to all the other mediocre fairy tale movies. And perhaps if this movie was made as a story inspired by Snow White, like what Tim Burton did with Alice in Wonderland, I don't think it would be as controversial as it is. It would have given leverage to take more risks, while also following the general plotline of Snow White. As for the positives, Rachel Zegler has a great singing voice, and I think her portrayal of Snow White was fine for what she was working with. All the performances were decent, but admittedly awkward at worst. Like I said before, Gal Gadot as an evil queen fell all over the place, and expectedly was a far cry from the animated queen, or even Charlize Theron or Julia Roberts. I thought Snow and Jonathan had a pretty cute relationship. I like that they helped each other, like Snow White helped John with the arrow, and he saved her from the curse. I have a weakness for happily ever afters, so the ending with a musical number, with them supposedly getting married, was satisfying to see. I don't know, I left the theater in a good mood. The biggest credit I could give this film is that it isn't that bad, but I will confirm that it's not good. Despite its genericness, Snow White is probably the most hated pre-release film, and will likely be remembered as one of the most hated films in history, though a lot of it isn't due to the movie itself, but rather what Rachel Zegler said about Snow White at the D23 event. What I find interesting is now all of a sudden, there's an army of Snow White defenders. Meanwhile, the character of Snow White has been criticized for being a quote-unquote bad role model for decades at this point. I understand that Rachel could have used better words to express herself, and even if she's thinking it, it's not the best optics to criticize a movie that's based on a work you're starring in. And yes, what she said really gave off 2014 BuzzFeed vibes, which I'll get into soon. But from witnessing a culture of anti-princess criticism, her comments on Snow White was relatively tame. Where did all this criticism of Snow White, or just Disney princesses in general, come from? One of the earliest critiques I could find towards the character of Snow White was in a Washington Post article written in 1987, stating, "Snow White may be pure, but she has no real estate, is compulsive about house cleaning, and talks to animals." Famed critic Roger Ebert wrote in 2001, "Snow White is, truth to tell, kind of a bore, not a character who acts, but one whose mere existence inspires others to act." But outside of the world of film criticism, characters like Snow White would be taken to a new height of cultural dominance with the establishment of the Disney Princess brand in 2001. Disney Princess characters were grouped together on t-shirts, pajamas, backpacks, bedsheets, folders, etc. And within 3 years, Disney Princess would become a billion-dollar empire. Within this brand, these characters were homogenized with ideals of market-friendly kindness, grace, and femininity. Their individual quirks and interests, highlighted in their movies, became less prominent. As the focus shifted towards marketability, their aim was to fit the glamorous princess mold. Take, for example, here's movie Mulan, and here's Disney Princess Mulan. Here's Merida in the movie Brave, and here's her controversial Disney Princess redesign. The popularity of this brand were analyzed in non-fiction books such as Packaging Girlhood, written by Lynn Mickle Brown and Sharon Lamb, who argued, playing princess is not the issue. The issue is 25,000 princess products. And one of the most notable critique on Disney princess culture was Cinderella Ate My Daughter, which was renowned for being a radical, timely wake-up call for parents. Author Peggy Ornstein analyzes the Disney princess phenomenon, but explains that she doesn't like Cinderella because she doesn't do anything. It seems that the tides were shifting regarding Disney princesses as role models, especially for Snow White and Cinderella, for they were characterized as passively waiting for their dreams to come true. This was reflected in the song Cinderella by I-5, made popular by the Cheetah Girls, which was about not wanting to be a distressed damsel, featuring the line, "I don't want to be like Snow White waiting for a handsome prince to come and save me," though that line was changed for the Cheetah Girls cover. And let's not forget the iconic bridge, "I can slay my own dragons. I can dream my own dreams. My knight in shining armor is me." This was the stuff we used to sing at birthday parties. Granted, we mostly listen to it because it's catchy with a good beat. This song is still great. And yes, it is important to be able to save yourself. But what I'm saying is that this was the popular mindset that people had about Snow White in this time. I've experienced a couple interactions in kindergarten where Snow White was described as boring, to which I replied, "No, she isn't," and you can't say anything against a strong argument like that. But clickbait sites that were trendy in the 2010s were just around the corner and had an abundance of snarky Disney-related content. Disney criticism was the focus on some of their viral videos. In a cracked video that discusses the worst lessons by Disney movies, Snow White was described as a dummy who relies on her looks and her looks alone, as well as mentioning that the prince sees a coma girl passed out and his instinct was to kiss her. And I will bring up that people have been calling the prince a creep for quite some time. whether or not it's deserved, just remember that this is foremost a fairy tale. This was joked about in the 2014 BuzzFeed video, If Disney Princes Were Real, which currently has 77 million views. The corresponding If Disney Princesses Were Real video mentions that Snow cleans for 7 men that never give her a hand, which got 26 million views. References like this is probably why it was decided that the dwarves clean their house in the whistle while you work scene. At the time, I didn't like this video because I thought it was annoying, and I still do, but now I see that it perfectly embodies the 2010s era of lazy Disney criticism. It seemed that people had an issue with the Disney princesses, but not necessarily the princesses on screen, but rather with the Disney princess brand. And this is why I'm not at all surprised as to why the writers of these remakes feel that they need to redeem their past characters. Even in the Cinderella remake, that is deservedly praised, scenes of her walking in town, talking to a friend, and her freely riding a horse were intentionally done to alleviate criticism that Cinderella is passive and doesn't do anything. And when I hear criticisms towards the new Snow White along the lines of, why are they changing the character of Snow White? People liked her the way she was. But they didn't. I saw directly throughout the 2010s, people were complaining, though it was rarely brought up that she was an orphan who refused to give up on hope and a positive attitude, because that was all she had left at the start of her journey. There are some people that have mixed feelings on Snow White. They may like her qualities, but not necessarily the implications of her character. Bappity Kate perfectly explains the anti-princess phenomenon, and its subsequent pendulum swing perfectly. I'll link her video in the description and the timestamp of when she discusses this. In the midst of controversies, some people are saying that Rachel Zegler's career has ended before it really began. I would say that's a little too close to call. Right now, she seems to be focusing on Broadway. She's currently Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, and will be portraying Eva Perón in Evita. It seems like she's doing just fine, and I think her performance style is well suited for theater. But what I find interesting is all the craziness, all the fury and anger, just for a generically below average film. Some things are just not worth all that emotional energy. Snow White isn't taking anything away from Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. This isn't the first mediocre film about Snow White, and it's not going to be the last. But on the bright side, we can now appreciate the animated film even more. So what can we take from this? What can we learn from live action Snow White movies? I learned I need to get a cloak. What do you think about Snow White and its controversies? Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.